Hey guys, my name is Ashley Rodriguez. If you don't know me, I am a Druid and a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids. I am a proud member of the Highland Oak Nemeton right here in Baton Rouge and a community builder, teacher, and leader in the community. Now, I want to speak for just a second about Druidry before I move on, because that is the lens that I'm looking through when I talk about the Wheel of the Year and really any spiritual practice. So, Druidry, as expressed through the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids, is a highly personalized system. We do honor the stories and histories of the Celtic people. So that's Scottish, Irish, Welsh, British traditions and stories are, the base of our studies and practices. We have other base studies and practices such as sacred grove exercises, and things like that. So there is a base, and we have lessons and stuff that we go through. The rest of it is customizable. So bring your own faith system or lack thereof and really make it your own. For me, Druidry is perfect because it is flexible and I am not great with rules. It is earth based. So we do explore spiritual concepts on, different planes, different levels, higher levels. We also, but we keep it grounded in the here and now, and we stay grounded in the earth. Druidry helps me explore my culture, encourages me to focus on community, and really, what I love about it is it allows me to take my creativity and put it into my spiritual or magical practice. As it relates to today's conversation, the most important thing about Druidry is that the practices are designed to help us step into the flow of the natural world. And we do that through ritual. We do that through a lot of different practices. But one of the biggest ways is through the Wheel of the Year. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the Wheel of the Year. And like I said, how it can be used as a system of transformation. So what do I know about transformation? How do these concepts work in my life? Yada, yada, yada. Long story short, I was born into a cycle of poverty. I was born into cycles of generational abuse, trauma. I was born, mental health issues that are cyclical in nature. I'm a recovering alcoholic and I've been sober for 5 years. So I've spent most of my life in these just really destructive, unhealthy, toxic cycles in my relationships, things like that. And, so with all of that considered, I really, the expectation for me wasn't to really do much in my life, because that's the effects of those things are so heavy that they often weigh us down. Now, whatever divine accident or intelligence that set my story in motion, I guess, had enough grace to put me in a culture and a society that very much lives by the cycles of the natural year. So I grew up in a remote mountain town in southeast West Virginia. We were cut off from resources a lot of times during bad winter storms, and we had four distinct seasons. Now, summer wasn't that long or that strong, but we did have the four distinct seasons. And what I learned to do through that process and growing up there is to kind of naturally and intuitively align with the changing of the seasons. And so that really helped me in this practice. But when the Wheel of the Year came along and it was a functional full system that I could use in an intellectual way to take that cycle and that alignment that I have with it and put it into practice, it really changed things for me. Now, like I said, I'm a community builder, community leader, teacher. I'm a director at a software company that's a multi-million dollar company that I've helped build, something I'm extremely proud of. And ironically, those the stuff we're going to talk about today comes into play there. They call it agile methodology, but it really is, using this system and systems like it. Like I said, 5 years sober. So if I look back at who I am 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, the person is completely unrecognizable. And that is physically, emotionally, spiritually, and relationship wise. And that's just really important to know. Most people who know me today would meet me and never know my history, my past, where I've been. And that's a good thing and a bad thing, but it's just a testament to how this system can help. Now, this system isn't a cure all, it is not the only thing that I've done. Also, have a really strong spiritual community, chosen family, therapy, and recovery program. Therapy and recovery program, however, align with this pretty much. It's about recognizing patterns and learning how to get in them. So, to sum it up, any spiral that I go into, find myself going into, or get lost in, today I have a system to pull myself out. And so that is how the Wheel of the Year has transformed my life. But what is the Wheel of the Year? So first off, the Wheel of the Year was codified in 1950s by Gerald Gardner, who is the founder of modern Wicca, and Ross Nichols, who is the founder of the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids. And it is a tapestry of culturally significant stories and practices. Now, what I like to do is I like to imagine Ross Nichols and Gerald Gardner sitting down in the woods, allegedly naked, if you believe the stories, and weaving together the stories and histories of the Celtic people into this system, the Wheel of the Year, which is a modern system. However, it is a modern system based on a very old and primal thing, and that is the solar cycle. The solar cycle is the divine cycle. It rules over life and death. Every day, the sun lives and dies. Every year, the sun lives and dies. We live and die with it. It is the force that moves us forward in life. It is the force by which we age, and it is a cycle of constant change that we are all part of as a collective. Every living being, everything that exists on the planet really lives and dies by this cycle. So as we connect to it, it is also going to connect us to the collective. And that is part of that stepping into the flow, right? The Wheel of the Year on a more personal level helps us break those unhelpful cycles I was talking about unhelpful emotional mental cycles, unhelpful cycles of relationships, getting out of cycles of abuse, developing better lives for ourselves, and also to develop our sacred selves. So I'm going to talk about this on a mundane and a magical level. It applies to both. When I talk about our sacred selves, a lot of people would call that our highest selves. I call it sacred selves because our highest selves and our lowest selves, no matter where you are in life or where you're at, you're sacred. You are a sacred being. You have this sacred space inside of you that is worth developing. And that is a big part of this practice, getting in touch with ourselves. The Wheel of the Year can also be used as a system of magical working. So, just like working with the moon, you can work with the waxing and waning of the sun. One thing that I do is I incorporate takeaways from every ritual that our grove does, or I do on my own, into my spell work. So I might keep something from the ritual and create a mojo bag, spell jar, whatever the case is. So it's very much a system of magical workings for me and many, many more. So this is a system used worldwide and by a lot of people. There are a lot of uses that I obviously can't get into and cover. And if you work with this system, following this, you may find, things that it does for you that are deeply personal that you may not even be able to express, but it is very flexible and widespread. So, what is the Wheel of the Year? Let's go through it a little bit. So, if if you're watching this video, you're probably somewhat familiar with the Wheel of the Year. Surely, if you have done any work in magical practices, you have seen it. And the first thing you may note is that the one you've seen looks different than this. Remember, I said it's a tapestry of cultural practices. It is, each quarter or cross quarter that we're going to talk about really is rooted in a different, Celtic system or belief. Like Bealtaine, for example, is Irish and Scottish. Samhain is actually the Welsh word for November. Fun fact. So, all of the different quarters and cross quarters and how we look at them come from different practices and cultures. Each one actually can be looked at from a different perspective from different cultures. So you may be able to look at multiple traditions for one culture and even relate them to your own. So that adds an air of complexity. And I think that is what is most overwhelming for people when they first learn the system is it seems so complicated and complex, right? And part of what I want to try to do today is help break that down and simplify it for you. So, at a very simple level, there are 4 quarter days. Those are going to be your solstices and your equinoxes. And they have various names. So, when you look at the wheel, that's going to be really the part that is the most different, depending on who has authored the image of the wheel you're looking at. I kept it pretty simple here. I'm going through spring equinox, just simply stating that. And then you'll see like Alban Eiler. Those are the Druid names. So if you go to druidry.org and you look at stuff about the Wheel of the Year from there, you will see that each quarter day has a Druid name. And so you can look up that information. But keeping it really simple. The solstices and the equinoxes are really the big solar events. So you have, the spring equinox, which is when the sun essentially arises or it lifts out of the dark, right? The sunrise of the year. And then you go to summer, which is the peak of the sun, the noon time. At autumn, the sun is setting. And at the winter solstice, that is going to be your midnight. And we'll go over that a little bit more in a second, but that is the basis of it. In between the quarter days, you have cross quarter days, also known as fire festivals or fire Sabbats. These are gateways or checkpoints between the quarters, and these have a lot of cultural significance and are really have a lot of agricultural significance and stuff like that. So we'll talk about those in a moment, but they are super important as they work as checkpoints between gateways and quarters. Now, as a druid, I and my grove, we perform rituals for all 8 observances. So every 6 weeks or so, you have druids all around the world in every place you can imagine, robing up, coming together either in a physical, virtual, or even solo form and performing ritual. I call that synchronized transformation because what I've seen happen is as we gather in these circles, we are one, developing our inner worlds or our sacred selves. In a ritual, you have your own work that you're doing, and we keep that in Druid rituals at least very personal. So I can step into the circle, do my own work. Somebody beside me may be doing their own work, and that's how it works. In the ritual, we come together as a grove. So as you can tell, it is called a grove because we, consider ourselves trees in some ways. And, any 2 trees or more together, that's a grove. So we do the work together, individually in the circle, together as a grove. That strengthens our grove, and we use that to strengthen our community. And you'll see that happening in really big ways right in Baton Rouge right now, which is exciting. And then from there, we strengthen the collective. So at the end of Druid rituals, we, take the inspiration that we have created, that we have gained in that ritual, and we radiate it back out to the collective, to the world, really sending peace and inspiration out. That's a big function. So we are transforming ourselves, transforming our groves and communities, and sending that back out into the collective to create this ripple of transformation. And that's why I call it synchronized transformation. So although, Druids doing rituals, synchronized rituals seem scary, we do not, nobody is harmed in the making. So it is not scary. It's actually a beautiful practice designed to, send inspiration and peace out into the world. So before we move on, I want to try to go through this, and I'm sorry if this is a little clunky, forgive me. But I want to kind of go through the Wheel of the Year in a kind of literary creative way. So I'm going to, kind of go through and talk about these in that way. Let's go ahead, and just before we dive in, I want to kind of take a moment to, get ourselves centered in the here and now, because what I want you guys to do is follow along and try to visualize your own things out of what I'm saying and see what comes up from that. So let's just, get comfortable in your seat. You do not have to sit up and be stiff. You can move during meditation. So if you so, please, get comfortable, move, lay down, whatever makes you comfortable. And as you get settled, I just want you to become aware of your breath, just your natural breathing. Don't focus too hard on it, just become aware of it. And now let's take a big, deep breath in. And as you release that breath slowly, feel the stresses of the day floating away. You can imagine them going back down through your hips into the ground beneath you. Imagine your feet as roots, and you can push all of that down into the ground beneath you. Take another big deep breath, and as you breathe in, feel peace settling inside of you. And just sit for a moment and become relaxed. Allow yourself to be focused in the now. Allow peace to radiate from the center of your being into the area around you. Recognize that you are sacred, you are whole, and you are here in this experience. When you're ready, you can keep your eyes closed and go through the meditation, or you can open your eyes. So let's go. Now, all things are born out of darkness. Flowers, children, and ideas grow from spark to spunk in what seems like the blink of the eye. By all accounts, spring is a time of childhood wonder. It is a time when new ideas seem limitless. With each warming day, our lives are pollinated with joy and hope. All around us, things are blooming, awakening, coming alive. Now, we try to stay in this playful energy as long as we can, but it is the nature of things to change. So, along the way, we slowly resign ourselves to the fact that each turning moment is moving us closer to maturity. And before we know it, we've arrived at the summer solstice. As the noontime sun rises above us, we stand tall, strong, and full of vigor. We are wiser than our spring selves and have enough experience to take control of our lives. It is now time to step into adulthood, take responsibility, and set our ideas into action. So we get to work. We pass the time toiling in the fields, putting pen to paper, and sowing the seeds of strength that come from living life and the beauty of the sun. With the end of the summer on the horizon, our work begins to slow. We spend our time tidying up loose ends, cutting away the things that are unhelpful, and planning for the winter months. By the time we reach the autumn equinox, there's nothing left to do but watch the sun set over the horizon. With the harvest complete, gratitude comes easier, and we find ourselves filled with the pride for all that we've achieved. When the sun dies, we find ourselves sitting in silent reflection. It is a time of endings, and there is some sadness in that, but we are not afraid. We're wiser now. We understand the value of endings and the role they play in renewal. Now, death can seem a scary thing, but it's mostly harmless. That is, if you know how to approach it, if you're not scared of it. You see, the turning of the wheel teaches us that when it comes to death, we either sit with it and sort it out, or it lives to haunt us. We release the things that are harmful or helpful, and a different type of harvest begins. Dusting off old memories and ideas gives us a chance to find the flickers of light that live within them. By the time we've made it to the winter solstice, we've laughed and loved beneath the spring sun. We've lived life with full vigor and tasted the fruits of our labor. We've made peace with our endings and learned to move through the darkest months. Then there's a great pause. The sun stops turning, and for 3 days, stillness hangs in the air around us. We sit beneath the twinkling midnight sky, basking in the beauty of the stars. This is the last incubation before the wheel turns, the sun begins to return, and it all begins again. So that is kind of a, kind of visual and literary or story based journey through the wheel. And I touched on a few things there. I touched on the physical turning of the season, the spirit of each of the quarters and cross quarters. And I have also, kind of touched on the practical application, right? So that's kind of the big three when it comes to the wheel of the year. You have physical incarnations, you have practical application, and you have the spirit of the season. When we talk about using energy, the spirit of the season is important. When we talk about magical workings, what to focus our spell work on, we the spirit and things matter a lot. So there's that. But what if we had done that a little bit different? That was kind of an ideal cycle where we're going through hitting each point, doing the work at each quarter and cross quarter, and coming to the end in this way that has brought forth all of this beauty, light, and harvest in our lives. But what if we put off doing the work, right? What if we stayed in the fields and played a little longer? We got stuck at spring equinox. We got stuck at Beeltena. Whatever the case is, we didn't do the work. We tried to skip summer. Well, when we got to Lunasa or the autumn equinox, we would find our harvest lacking, right? We would not have anything to harvest, or we might have, but not as much. The reality would set in on us, and growing up in a remote town, surviving harsh winters, and I know that fear that can come from not having enough, from lacking, that comes from poverty too. I just thought of that. I've spent a lot of time in lack in my life, and there's a darkness and a fear in that, and it can pull you down. So if we had skipped in this situation, if we had skipped the work, then we would go into winter, go into Samhain in a much darker mood. That death, releasing, reflection would all be way too heavy, and maybe we would miss that as well. So that's just an example. But the point is that each checkpoint in the wheel is super important, and being mindful of not skipping any, and making sure to do the work at each point, and is really important. And that goes for annual, daily, lifetime, situationally. It applies to all of it. Trying to hit all of the points is helpful. Let's talk a little bit about the fire festivals before we move on. A lot of people say that what you can do with the fire festivals is kind of celebrate them at any time. It's a spirit, and you can. For me, growing up in West Virginia, in bulk, really the heralding of spring didn't really happen until late April, May. Sometimes, we still had snow really late in the year. So I did in practice in bulk, or the spirit of it, much later. right? But when we're talking about it in this context, and you can do that, you can celebrate, you can really celebrate any of these at any time you want for the spirit of the reason of it. But when we talk about creating a system where we're going through, especially on an annual basis, and we're doing the rituals, I do find it is important to look at the fire festivals as those checkpoints or the gateways, right? And our stories, these are often the meetings of deities. So you'll find, I'm a winter girl, or winter person. Sorry, I misgendered myself. But anyway, that's weird. But I'm a winter person. So I work with the kayak and I work with Bridget mainly as my turning of the year. So instead of having, a different deity, which you'll sometimes see, different deities from different cultures talked about throughout the wheel, I find it helpful to, try to understand as many continuous stories as I can. And the kayak and Bridget, it's a continuous story. They are very much linked and connected. And there's this passing of the flame that happens where Bridget, and the kayak meet at Imbolc. And I like to imagine there's a lot of like, oh, it's a battle, and Bridget overcomes the kayak and takes the flame and brings the sun back. You can believe that, whatever that is, what some people in history have how they framed it. But I like to think the kayak coming to the end of the long winter's journey with that little flame, that little spark that was left over from the dark winter, and sitting in the cottage with Bridget on the night of Imbolc, and them sitting by the warmth of that fire, and the kayak getting to see the beginning of that fire growing, and I imagine them sitting and talking about the journey that has happened to get to this point, and maybe Bridget sharing her hope for the journey to come. And that meeting of deities in these stories tells us a lot about the importance of these cross quarters in our practice. These are opportunities for us to sit in between the solstice and the equinox and do a check-in, right? I always evaluate the present, whatever my goal is, whatever work I'm doing, am I grounded or aligned with my goal or my desired outcome? Have I strayed, right? Am I still centered in my purpose? So as I'm developing my sacred self, what is my purpose? How does that align with my goal? And when I'm doing these checkpoints, am I still centered in that? If not, then I can change things, I can say, well, is this goal still a goal? If not, I can change it up. What goal can I work toward in the next few weeks going into the next season? I also want to look back. These times of reflection is so important to breaking cycles or developing healthy cycles, or creating the energy in the world that you want, whatever it is. Reflection is important. So I'll take these as a chance to look back. Hey, what went wrong? I'm off center. What went wrong? What things am I holding on to that maybe are holding me back, or will keep me from meeting my goal in the next season? Those types of things. And of course, I can use all of that information to refocus the future. Do I have what I need to move forward? If not, what do I need to acquire? Can I do that? Is it reasonable? We do need to reset our goals sometimes. And do I need to adjust my goal or my timeline for the goal? So maybe it's darn, this still is a goal, but not yet, not now. How can I refocus it to the timeline so I'm still working toward the goal, I'm not getting discouraged and giving up, but I'm adjusting it to reality, right? So that's how I look at the fire festivals and how important they are in this practice. Now, one thing that I hear a lot is, and I struggle with this too on certain situations, right? So one thing that I hear a lot is I hear, I don't resonate with the wheel of the year because I don't live in Four Seasons country. Now, I grew up in West Virginia, Four Seasons country, beautiful turning of seasons, very physical, visual representations of that constantly around me. And then I moved to Louisiana. And Louisiana has seasons. Every place has the seasons. It's the turning of the sun, right? That makes the seasons. They're just not as physical and visual here, and I do struggle with connecting to the seasons here. And so I get it when people say, "Well, I can't really connect." And so one thing that I always say back is the basis of most magical systems or spiritual systems is correspondences. We are connecting to for the work, the magical and emotional work, we are connecting to the spirit of these things. We're using the spirit and the energy in our life. So you can make up your own visualization. You don't have to be restricted just by the world that's around you. And to do that, we look at basic correspondences. So we look at you can take everything and boil it down to a center. What is the center? What is the meaning? And the turning of the seasons has very specific correspondences that we can go through. So I'm going to go through some of those. And what I want to encourage you to do as I go through this is just use this as a thinking exercise. What will these things look like in the landscape around you? Because it is important for us as we connect to have some method of connecting to it visually or physically, right? So we're going to start with spring equinox. No, we'll start with Imbolc. So a lot of people think that the wheels or the year starts at Imbolc. Well, the sun begins to rise at the winter solstice. So that's the birth of the sun. It just takes the land a while to catch up. And for me, like I said, I follow the carrying of the flame. And so really the birth or the awakening happens at Imbolc, right? That's when the flame is relit, however you see it, and things start to stir slowly. And if we're looking at this on a daily perspective, that is the moments before sunrise. If you're a get up before sunrise person, I am not, but think of the moment before you do wake up, the moments that you lay in bed. It's the slow awakening, right? So that's on a daily basis. If we're, you know, relating this to a practical use, I'll use maybe, the practical use of an idea coming to life, then that would be the inspiration, that maybe that subconscious inspiration that we get that wakes us up and leads to the birth of the idea, which happens in spring. So spring is the physical incarnation of birth. It's when the sun rises, it's when the forest comes alive, your physical world around you will come alive. There's something blooming, I'm sure, and you just kind of have to look at what is blooming around you if you want that physical aspect. But then we have other correspondences in our lives. This is our childhood. These are our childhood years. So you can connect for the spring equinox, connect to your child, your inner child. This is a good time to do inner child work, to connect to your playfulness, right? I already said it's the time of the sunrise. The direction is east because the sun rises in the east. You'll see how the directions go. Sun following the sun, right? Element is air. And then, of course, you have your signs. The energy of this time is playful, inspiring, and hopeful. And then we go to Bealtaine. And that is a hard one for me. Bealtaine and the summer solstice are the hardest for me. And it's for the same reason people in Louisiana have trouble with literally every other season, because we have mostly summer here. It's because I didn't have very long, late spring wasn't a thing. So that's what Bealtaine is. It's that late spring. It is that adolescent, or not adolescence, that's our preteen years. So if the summer solstice is our adolescence, Bealtaine is our preteen years. So very, very troubling and trying. We make this very sexual, and there's a union thing, and it is historically a sexual fire sabbat and stuff like that. So those are practices you can look into if that appeals to you. For me, I kind of look at this as a time of maturing, right? So it's that process of maturing, and I really struggle with Bealtaine. I'm going to try to connect to Bealtaine more this year. And I told a friend that somebody who actually came to the live class of this, and they were like, but you're Aries. I feel like you would be basking in that sun. And I never thought of it. And I'm like, yeah, I should be, but it's just really hard for me to connect to. But it essentially is those preteen years, that, process of maturing, when we become more aware of what mature life is going to be like. Then we have the summer solstice, which is June 21st ish. And that is our time of adolescence. So it's a time of, stepping into our strength, becoming proud, becoming alive. By this time, if we've done the work in our lives, we are a fully individuated person. We know who we are. We're centered in ourselves. We know what we want, and we are starting to get the strength to go and get it, right? So the time of the day for that is noon. The direction is south, and it is the time of fire, because the sun is the strongest and highest, right? The signs for this are Cancer, Leo, I spelled that incorrectly, and Virgo. And then we go into Lunasa. Lunasa. That's this fire sabbath here. So if we've done the work at Lunasa, we begin to harvest. And I really like the harvest season. It was always in mine, ours, autumn and Lunasa was kind of really combined for us, because like I said, winters come really fast, but it was this time of like being in the kitchen and canning. We're harvesting our meat at this time, so we're always doing that. That was a community experience, the process of processing our meat and giving thanks for that. All of that process was deeply ingrained in my culture. And so Lunasa is that time of harvesting. And it's an exciting time, because you get to sit and say, gosh, I worked hard this summer. I sowed those seeds in spring. Look at all of this bounty and beauty that I've created from that. And it's really a beautiful time of harvest. And then we move into the autumn equinox, and that is when the sun is setting. And this is the element of water. So we're going from fire to water. And the visual for me for the autumn equinox that is really strong is the sun setting over a lake or a pool of water. And that is if you're in Louisiana, the sun is so big and bright in the summer. I remember feeling like I was going to drive directly into it, driving down, the highway. And so this is a really good visual for autumn, is to go and watch the sunset over a bayou, because the bayou is so still and the sun is so big. And that image of the sun setting and the beauty of the sunset, it makes it a lot less scary. Endings are less scary when you see the beauty in them. And so, yeah. And so the autumn equinox is the time of sunset. That's our old age and death. We are wise at this point. We have lived our lives. We've harvested our harvest. This is the time when if it's idea based, we're editing the thing or whatever, right? But it's a time of responsibility, taking responsibility for our actions, taking responsibility for the lives we've lived, for our, situational input, whatever that may be. A time of great gratitude, because if you sit and watch the sunset, if you've done the harvest at Lunasa, you have a lot to be grateful for. Even in bleak times, there is gratitude. And the program, which does closely align with the Wheel of the Year, which I can talk about in a second if I remember. And it teaches us the importance of gratitude. And this is the time to hone that gratitude process. Always sit in gratitude and practice it. Do it on an annual basis. It becomes easier to do on a daily basis. And so that is the autumn equinox. And then we go into Samhain, which everybody knows as the time of the ancestors, the time of death. It is a time of releasing. So at Lunasa, we've harvested things, we've shucked off the corn. That's the image that I like to use. We've kind of shucked that all away, and all of the waste from our work has laid at our feet. Samhain is a time to sit on that reflect on it, pay honor to the good and the bad in our lives, to the good and the bad in the situation, and then to release the things that don't serve us. Get rid of those. Releasing is very important. People get scared of death. They get scared of dark. They get scared of your roots. Root work is scary. Yes, it's scary and it's dark and it's heavy and it's hard. It's necessary, right? Because what we release becomes fertilization for the winter solstice, the winter time. This is the time of the kayak. This is I have these I have these mixed, and I'm not going to fix them because I've come this far. But autumn equinox is the adulthood, winter solstice is old age and death. I don't know why I got those backwards, but anyway, so the winter solstice is the time of midnight. And what happens at midnight? Of course, I talk about being awake and looking at the stars, but most of us are asleep at midnight. This is that deep setting in. Everything that we've released, everything that we have on our minds, our subconscious, they're all at work fertilizing and permeating throughout our being, right? So what happens is at the winter solstice time, the winter solstice energy, if we haven't dealt with something, if we haven't released something, it comes to haunt us. And that, it's where nightmares come from. And so we can control the rot, is what I call it. I did a presentation called The Bitter Winter, where I really went into the journey from journey through the dark half of the year. And I may record that. But this is that great time of sinking in. Our subconscious mind is forming our sense of self. Everything's, sitting, releasing into the ground beneath us. And when you think about the ground beneath us in the earth, that is the mycelial network, that is the essence that permeates throughout our lives, right? And so the winter solstice is not a time that we are usually consciously aware of, but it is very important. And all of the work we do throughout the year really comes to a culmination at the winter solstice and has a huge impact on us. And, we have the least control over, at least in a daily sense, we have the least control here. So that the work becomes really important throughout the day there. And the winter solstice is hard to sum up, but that's that. So that is all of the correspondences. Now, what I want to urge you guys all to do is to think about what the wheel of the year looks like for you. We are very visual people. And so it does help to take those basic correspondences and make a vision board or year map. So start to look at your physical landscape around you. What does your spring look like? And what is blooming during that time of the year for you? Photograph like a spring sunrise, midday, summer sunset, sunset and autumn, midnight and winter. Photograph, find, or just go out and look at those things. What does it look like? What physical signs of the seasons do exist around you? They may not look like the traditional ones, but they're there, and that will help you connect. And what stories, deities, and correspondences call to you the most? So I talked about the Bridget and the kayak. I tend to lean on Irish and Scottish culture because that is I consider those the inspiration for my culture, because I grew up in an area heavily settled by those people. And while I'm not Scottish or Irish, and I'm careful not to appropriate that culture, I am inspired by those people, and I consider those deities and stories my ancestors, and I honor them as such. So I use those a lot in my practices. But what calls to you? And it doesn't have to be Celtic. I also tell personal stories to relate to these. So my personal ancestors, my personal life stories help me as much as the stories of deities. And so, what calls to you the most? This is your journey. You get to customize it. And the hardest one, and really, if you're talking about personal transformation, the most important, but the hardest one is, what are your internal cycles? What's your cycle of grief look like? And that's going to be different for each situation. But what does your anger cycle look like? I am a very peaceful person. Today has not always been that way. When I first got sober, there's a famous story of me wanting to punch somebody in a gas station over a chicken biscuit, and me calling my sponsor thinking she was going to agree with me. And, of course, she was like, no, that's not right. And I fought most of my life. I was real quick to throw hands, right? And I call that my summertime anger. Today, I've worked enough on that cycle to not start in the summertime when it comes to my anger. I need to go through that cycle in a more helpful way. And I know when I'm getting into my summertime anger, and I know to pull back. So things like that. A big one is relationship cycles. That's, I think, a little bit easier to look at. When a relationship ends, when the sun sets in autumn on your relationship, are you processing? And when you process, are you looking at your part? Are you, doing that when I talked about the fire festivals? Are you looking back over what went wrong so you can prevent it? Are you looking at the present on how it's affecting you? And are you looking at the future? What do you want in a relationship? And are you releasing the anger and not carrying it into the next relationship? Those types of things. So those cycles you will start to identify, and you can use it for personal growth. Now, I will say before I close out, I've talked for 40 odd minutes, and I hope you got something out of this, but I will say before I close out that the physical practice on a daily, yearly basis helps us understand the internal cycles. So if you're struggling with that last one, that's fine. If you develop this as a practice, spell work or annual work, whatever, the last part comes not pretty easy, but it gets easier over time. And that's it. That is all that I have. I hope you've gotten something out of this. I hope you've watched until now. This means a lot to me. It's helped me a lot. And I'm really happy to be able to share this with you guys, and hopefully help you in some way deepen your practice or find inspiration for something that will, give you help and solace and comfort and peace in the future. I love you all, and I look forward to whatever our next meeting and next lessons will be.